Hello, this is meteorologist Brad Warner from Region Weather Live, your YouTube source for weather across the Dakotas and Minnesota. And wow, we got a lot to talk about. We've got the potential for some snow coming across North Dakota, northern Minnesota, Thursday, late Thursday in through Thursday night. We've got the possibility of some freezing rain across central parts of Minnesota, in particular, rain down on the southern parts of Minnesota. We've got the possibility of some thunderstorms Thursday night, southeast South Dakota, southern Minnesota, some of which could have some small hail, and perhaps even just kind of make it up to that severe limits on an isolated storm as possible, where we could get up to 1 inch in diameter hail, just an outside chance of that. Then, as we get into Friday, we've got more snow on the way for South Dakota, some of which could be heavy at times. That's going to spread over into Minnesota. Later in the day on Friday afternoon, unfortunately, we will have to talk about the potential of some severe weather across the far southeastern portions of Minnesota, including Winona counties, Fillmore, Houston, and some of that has the potential of a tornado or two if the conditions set up right. And so as we go through the afternoon hours on Thursday, you can see how that precipitation begins to ramp up, particularly across Minnesota, where we've got the rain down in the south, the snow to the north, and then right in between that transition as that moisture continues to stream in there, we've got that freezing rain possible just kind of north of the Twin Cities, I think, kind of through St. Cloud and up to Alexandria. And then as we continue on into the afternoon and kind of closer to that evening hour, right around 7 p.m., we see that snow band begin to set up across North Dakota, northern Minnesota. And I also think we need to watch out in particular as we get into the evening and the early parts of Thursday night, that this band of freezing rain that develops right in through here, we could have some frontogenesis going on with that at this point. And what that is just we've got a big temperature difference that starts to occur within that time frame, within that region, and it really starts to ramp up the precipitation. So we're going to have to, again, like I said, that area is probably, I think, is going to be concerned as we get into Thursday evening and in through the overnight hours Thursday night. In fact, if I leave that yellow on there and I continue through the night and we get to about 10 p.m., we see the potential, at least, of that freezing rain continuing within that area and the snow that continues to develop further to the north. Now, one thing to monitor as we go through the overnight hours Thursday night is going to be this warm front that sits just to the south. We've got a good low-level jet that begins to set up and wants to develop some thunderstorms across southeast portions of South Dakota, southern Minnesota. And in fact, if I switch over to a different model, to the HRRR, to the HRRR model, we could see those storms kind of develop down into Yankton, Sioux City, and begin to push northward across southern portions of Minnesota. Perhaps it's possible that some of these storms and rain could actually fall for a little bit as freezing rain and or thunder sleet, perhaps across southeast portions of South Dakota. So that could be interesting in its own right. But ultimately what I'm concerned about, especially if these storms do develop, that it's going to push this warm front a little bit further north. And what that means is later in the day on Friday, that's going to allow higher dew points to surge just into the far southeastern portions of Minnesota. And that could be enough to produce some severe weather down in the far southeastern portions of Minnesota later in the day on Friday, some of which could obviously contain the possibility, at least, of an isolated tornado or two. And so I really think it's going to be interesting watching to see if these thunderstorms do indeed develop overnight Thursday night and into early Friday morning, to see if that's enough to push that warm front just a little bit further north. Now, with that said, even if the storms don't develop, there's that possibility that still that warm front surges just a little bit further north than what is previously forecast. And so don't completely hang your hat on to those storms, but just kind of keep that in your mind that if they do develop through the overnight hours Thursday night, that maybe that warm front's going to push just a little bit further north. And so continuing on through the early parts of Friday morning, we really begin to see that snow ramp up across South Dakota here. So now this low that's just off the screen here is really starting to ramp up. We're starting to pull in the snow. We're starting to develop that snow on the backside. And then as we get later in the day, watch how the thunderstorms begin to develop. And again, I've kept this yellow on in through here. Watch how as we get through the day as well, where we're probably going to have more freezing rain push into that area throughout the day on Friday. So they're really going to get it Thursday night to where these roads could really be slippery across central portions of Minnesota. But then as we get into Friday, that same area in through here has got the potential of seeing even more freezing rain and sleet. All right, so we continue on and we get to about 10 a.m. and about noon and 1 p.m. here. We could see, there we go. That's when the freezing rain and sleet kind of begin to push back in. We've got the snow now across central and northeastern parts of South Dakota, perhaps just into the far southeast North Dakota, west central Minnesota as well. And I accidentally got rid of that circle now, so it's right in through there. And going into the afternoon hours on Friday, here we go. We see those storms begin to develop further to the south into Iowa and begin to creep up into far southeast parts of Minnesota. So Mower, Fillmore, Houston, Winona, U counties down in the far southeast. This is around 4 or 5 p.m. We're starting to see those storms roll through that area. So keep that in mind as we get to that 4, 5, 6, 7 p.m. time frame down in that part of the state. And the other thing that really needs to be emphasized with all this, with these severe storms, is the speed at which they're going to be moving at. These things are going to be trucking. They're going to be moving 60 miles per hour, perhaps even more. So if a tornadic storm does develop, or even if we have some straight line winds develop, these things are going to be moving through your area quickly. You're not going to have a lot of time to prepare. So just know, if these storms do develop to your west, man, get ready, because they're coming through in a hurry. So those of you down in the southeast, you're right on that line where that warm front could just waffle a little bit either way. That low pressure could just kind of just skim you guys a little bit down to the south and east. And that would mean that you could potentially miss the severe weather. But if it does hit you right, if it comes through the way it possibly could, with a couple other models are indicating, you've got the potential of seeing some tornadic activity down there. So we'll have to monitor it. I have to mention it just because, man, if it comes through, it could be bad. Hopefully it stays to the south. And so at this point on Friday evening, we're going to switch over to the split screen, where we've got the precipitation over here on the left and the wind gusts over here on the right, just because by this point, beyond this, these storms are going to be moving out, and we're dealing with mainly the winter weather portion of the storm beyond this. Now, we'll continue to, at this point in Friday evening, to have some pretty good snows across eastern South Dakota, west central and southwest Minnesota. But I do think this particular model has this band right here too far north. I really do. I think that we're probably going to be looking at this band just set up a little bit further south, mainly kind of Duluth and Brainerd and Bemidji on southward of you guys. So I think this band that it's setting up in through here is probably just a little bit too far north. But I'm kind of continuing to use this model just because of the timing of everything. It's the latest model I've got, and it probably has the best timing. Now, as we get to 9 and 10 p.m., we can see that snow now begins to really develop and wrap around into southeastern portions of Minnesota. So some of you who might have severe weather earlier in the evening, looks like you've got the potential of seeing some snow, possibly heavy at times, and even perhaps the possibility of sleet as well as we get into Friday night. Now, I do think by this point, this model predicts a little bit better picture, where most of it really is across far eastern South Dakota and southern Minnesota, and we move the winds along to match it. Look at the winds now starting to ramp up across eastern South Dakota. So some of you in through here now, you're going to be dealing with the blowing and drifting snow on top of this, and it's going to reduce visibilities. We've got slippery road conditions. So things are again going to be getting to be really become a mess late Friday afternoon into the Friday evening time frame. Now, also notice we've got some pretty strong easterly winds potentially across east central Minnesota. So if there are any kind of snowfall accumulations up and through there, of course, you're looking at some pretty nasty conditions at the very least. We know we're looking at probably the freezing rain in through here. So if we're going to add on to the winds on top of this, man, again, things just aren't really looking good when you combine those two. And so moving along as we get to midnight and 1 a.m. here on the left, and the same over here on the right, we continue to see those winds ramp up across portions of South Dakota, Minnesota. We begin to see that back edge of that snow. We'll probably see the moderate to heavy still just kind of clipping that southeast portion of Minnesota here before it exits out. And really, even for the remainder of you down and through here, we're still talking 35, maybe 40 mile per hour wind gusts. And obviously, that's going to be enough to really blow some of that snow around, cause some drifting, reduce the visibilities, create hazardous travel conditions through the overnight hours Friday night. Now, thankfully, this does move off pretty quickly as we get to about 4 a.m. We see the snow begin to taper off from west to east. Now we're just left with a little bit down in the far southeast part of the Minnesota. We continue to see the really strong winds, 45, possibly 50 miles per hour down there as well. So now, again, we're talking about the really bad low visibilities, and then wrapping this up by Saturday morning by 7 a.m. We see that snow pretty much is out of the state. We've got just kind of the back edge of the really strong winds left down there. The 30 mile per hour winds a little bit further back to the north and west. So more than likely, we're still going to be seeing some drifting snow as we get into the early part of Saturday morning, a little bit further back. But as we go through the morning, that continues to move down to the southeast and conditions improve throughout the morning on Saturday. And so snow accumulations Thursday afternoon to Thursday night, through Thursday night until we get to about roughly 6, 7 a.m. Friday morning. Here's kind of what's expected, where we're looking at 3 to 5 just west of Duluth. We did trim that back a little bit. We did extend this 1 to 3, as I kind of mentioned last night, as possible, a little bit further to the west. So there could be some areas for a little bit higher snowfall amounts reaching across portions of North Dakota, kind of between Highway 2 and Highway 200. But the other change really is we really cut back on this stuff further to the north. It really looks like that initial storm, that first band of snow coming late Thursday night, really develops into a thin band here across North Dakota, northern parts of Minnesota. So there's going to be a cutoff a little bit further north than what we were previously indicating last night. And just to add a little more caveat, there is the possibility in some of these areas of just seeing a little bit, just a little sliver of higher accumulation in there. Really hard to determine where exactly, but to just kind of keep that in mind, that if you do pick up a little more than 3 inches for some of you, it wouldn't be completely surprising, but in general, most areas within here will see 1 to 3. Now, the potential for freezing rain, this starts Thursday afternoon and really goes through Friday. And a good chunk of this, particularly across Minnesota, a lot of that happens beginning Thursday evening into the overnight hours Thursday night. So this is really where you're going to pick up a good chunk of your freezing precipitation. So by the time your Friday morning commute comes along for you guys in through here, boy, it might not be good for you at all, just because of that potential freezing rain and sleet. Now, those of you back down to the southwest across South Dakota here, most of this kind of happens and occurs through Friday morning and into Friday afternoon. It looks like when most of this will happen. There is the potential Friday morning that maybe some of you a little bit back to the west could see an isolated pocket of some freezing drizzle or maybe some freezing rain. But I think the chance is just too small at this point to really mention it. And so really the main pockets ultimately are going to be within this pinkish purplish area. And so we kind of add that insult on top of everything else. In the snowfall forecast for Friday through Friday night, right now this is very, very generalized, just because the models still aren't really in a good, strong agreement of where exactly some of this heavier snow will fall and exactly how much will fall. So just keep that in mind right now, that this is very generalized. I hope to narrow this down a little bit as we get into Thursday here. But our heaviest snowfall right now looks to be east of Rapid City, cutting through Pierre, including Chamberlain, Watertown, Aberdeen. You guys are really going to get nailed, as well as kind of butting up against that plateau here, as we're going to be having some easterly winds. So that's where this little appendage comes from. And then the potential, at least, of some higher amounts somewhere across east central Minnesota. Just depends on where exactly that band sets up. If you remember a little bit earlier, I said that the 1 mile kind of really brings that higher band further north, and I thought it's going to be further south. And so that's where I think we're kind of indicating this at this point, that perhaps that little bit stronger band is just north of the Twin Cities, between the cities and Duluth. Otherwise, in the blue, we've got the 3 to 7, and we kind of pull that down into the far southeast portions of Minnesota, just because, again, as that system kind of wraps up, as I showed you, we've got some pretty moderate to heavy snowfalls that begin to occur late into Friday night and early parts of Saturday morning. So really, when we're talking about this 3 to 7, man, it comes quick, because once it snows, it's going to come down fast. And then we've got the 3 to 7 across the higher elevations of the Black Hills, and then otherwise just a general trace to 3 inches at this point. So we'll have to adjust this as we get closer. This is the initial forecast that we're looking at. Obviously, we'll fine tune this and move it north or south. It just kind of depends on how exactly some of this sets up. But for now, this is what's forecasted. This is kind of what's expected. And then, as if all that wasn't enough, we've got the potential of another large storm system for the beginning of next week. And so this is just a snapshot of Wednesday afternoon. Don't take it literal. This is out there a ways, but this is just kind of to give you an idea of what the models are showing. And we've got all three different models indicating a big storm coming through by the beginning of the week. So where exactly, the timing, all that stuff has yet to be resolved. As we take a look at the three different models, you can see just the differences between them at this point when it's this far out. I mean, but they are agreeing that something will be coming. So just keep that in mind as we go probably beginning Monday night into Tuesday and most likely wrapping up by early Thursday morning as it sits right now. And so a couple of things to stress here. Of course, the severe weather down in the far southeast parts of Minnesota, because if that does develop, we're talking the possibility of some tornadoes ripping through there, and they're going to be moving very, very fast. We're talking 60 miles per hour zipping through there. So you're not going to have a lot of time as these storms develop and move through, if they do indeed move through that area. So, man, just be watching that and keep that in mind. Also, you've got the heavy snow moving across South Dakota and eventually into Minnesota, and you've got the strong winds on the backside of that. So we're looking at hazardous travel conditions throughout the day on Friday across central and eastern parts of South Dakota, and then eventually transitioning through Minnesota through the overnight hours Friday night. Again, with the winds, and then probably persisting into the early parts, at least, of Saturday morning as those winds subside. So, man, we've got a lot going on with this storm system that's kicking out. Man, this is an impressive spring storm, I guess we call it, because we're talking about the severe weather and we're talking about snow. So obviously, spring weather can it does both. It has both, and man, this is an impressive one. And then we're going to have to shift our focus into next week as the next one comes along. So, with all that said, I might have zipped through a lot of this fast. So if I did, if you have any questions, add a comment down below. Feel free to ask me a question on the comments. I'd love to answer people's questions if they're traveling, if they've got something planned and want to know a little bit better of the timing. Make sure you ask me down there. I would love to answer any questions. Also, make sure you look and keep an eye on my social media sites up here, particularly Facebook. I post a lot more on there. So as details come along throughout the day, I'll post things on there. And then don't forget to subscribe, because when the severe weather does happen, I'll be on live. So we'll be taking a look. We'll be watching this stuff Friday afternoon into Friday evening. And if it looks like it's going to occur, I'll be on live on the camera. So make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the bell button, if I could talk. That way you know when I'm on live. Well, anything else? I think I covered it. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. That was a lot. So, all right, we'll check back in tomorrow and we'll see how things are progressing. So for now, for Region Weather Live, I'm meteorologist Brad Werner, and everybody stay safe. Have a good day.